this session. All right, well, welcome to Reading Ready, Reading to Succeed on the HSE exam. Whether you're taking GED, HiSET, or TASK, these tips, strategies, tools we'll provide today will help you to attack this exam. My name is Jen Denton. I'm the Student Success Coach here at Essential Education, a part of our growing Student Success team, specifically designed with your success in mind. We constantly say your success is our goal, and as we've titled this session, Read to Succeed on the HSE exam, success is the ultimate tool. It's the ultimate goal, right? That's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to pass the exam and then go on to your next steps in life. And we know one thing is for sure when it comes to reading. Successful readers are strategic readers. What do I mean by that? It means you're reading with purpose, you're reading with a goal in mind, and you come to the table with a plan. And this is no more true than when you are reading on a test in a testing environment, because you want to read with purpose to answer those test questions that are going to follow up those passages and that text on the exam. So maybe this is you. You're reading on the exam and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I got to get in. I got to be a reader. I'm going to attack this passage. You get to the end of the passage and you think, what in the world did I just read? That is very often me. I very often find myself, especially when I'm in a panic situation, when I feel like I'm under the gun for time, I might not read as carefully as I normally would. I might just kind of skip over some things. And then that leaves me with this very unsettling feeling. What did I just read? And if you're in a testing environment, maybe the next thing that comes to mind is, oh my gosh, now I'm losing time. If I have to go back and reread again, I'm losing time. What if I fail? How many points can I miss again? I don't know. What do I have to score on this thing? I don't know what that means. What did I just read? All of these things kind of swirl around in your head and they steal your confidence and they do steal your time. So we're going to address this right on today, and I'm going to tell you to stop. I'm going to help you come up with some tools to stop that negative thinking dead in its tracks, because when you prepare to pass, when you prepare to read, you can go into any testing situation with positivity and confidence. So what we're going to do today is address a plan. We're going to address resources that you can dip into, and we are going to address those tests. Again, if you've not yet shared your specific test, I know we have at least one or two GED testers that shared. If you're taking something else, if you're taking the HiSET or the task, let me know. Otherwise, we will just kind of fly through some of this information. If you are a task tester, these are the basics of your test. You're going to have 75% reading and informational text, and 25% is going to be reading literature. It's basically your fiction and your nonfiction. Those subdomains, basically, what does that mean? It means they're going to ask for key ideas and details. Craft and structure, that's just a fancy way to say how the paragraph or how the passage is laid out. You're going to see integration of knowledge and ideas, wanting you to read and analyze what you read. And then a small percentage of those task takers in the reading section is going to be vocabulary acquisition and use, basically words and how you use them. You can double check all of this information and you should get to know your national testing site. If you're taking the task, that is tasktest.com. So for our taskers, these are the basics of what you are going to see on the actual test as far as reading is concerned. For our HiSET testers, very, very similar layout. We get really specific when we look at your test at a glance, because we see that you have 65 minutes if you're taking the test in English, and a little bit more time for our second language learners who are taking the test in Spanish. You have 50 questions. Again, like many things on the HiSET, those questions are multiple choice in their entirety. Again, similar to what you see on the task, you're going to see informational and literary text broken up a little bit more on the literary side, or the fiction side there in HiSET. So just be prepared for that a little bit. And then you'll see these subcategories for the HiSET. Comprehension, what do you remember? Inference, can you take clues from the reading and make judgments? Analysis, what do you think about what you read? And then synthesis and generalization, coming up with those key ideas, those main topics. Again, if you're a HiSET tester, this is a site you need to get to know, hiset.ets.org. You can find these test basics plus a slew of other really important information there for our HiSetters. And lastly, probably the bulk of who's joining us today, GED testers. We have something really special for you on our website, and this is going to do a direct link for us there. This is a reading and writing cheat sheet. I say reading and writing and not just reading, because if you don't know already, reading and writing are combined on the GED. They give you a lot more time. They give you 170 minutes. So they're just condensing reading and writing into one section. So you get over 2 hours to do it. And again, just like we saw with HiSET and task, these sections for reading are going to be broken up into nonfiction and fiction writings, 75 and 25 here, so heavy on the nonfiction here. And again, you're going to be asked questions about main idea, point of view, the details in the story. Again, we see the layout or the structure, and how does the writer use words. So today, as we go through these sessions, I want to always start where we always do, which is looking at the test, what you'll need for the test. Again, for our GED testers, your site's super easy to remember, GED.com. With those subsections and with those things in mind, those are the things that we're going to focus on as we talk about strategies. And every good strategy, every good tell me how philosophy starts with resources. Many of today's ideas and concepts are coming from our book that's available on our website, Essential Reading Skills. If you're already a student with Essential Education, this is the workbook that correlates or goes along with your lessons, that as you're working through your reading and writing lessons, if you ever see, hey, this lesson corresponds to page 163 or 167, this is the book that it's talking about, and it is available at our bookstore. But today, because you're joining this session, we are going to provide you a freebie. We're going to provide you an entire chapter on text structure. That's the chapter we're going to give you, and it's going to be in that follow-up attachment. These are really, really great resources. Again, we're going to talk about some key concepts, but if you really want to dive into the strategies mentioned and the tools mentioned today, this is a great way to do so. And you can use resources and you can use times like today's session to help you make a plan. Because again, reading strategically is reading for success. So let's just jump right in to those specific tell me hows. We're going to start today and end today with something called the D.A.R.E process. D.A.R.E is an acronym, just like your tests are acronyms, that stand for this kind of overall map that we're going to use to attack reading. And the D, A, R, and E stand for determine the purpose, approach the text, read the text, and evaluate the text. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start from the beginning. Determining the purpose sets the tone for everything you're going to do. It attempts to ask these questions. What's the reason for reading? Why am I reading this passage? What do I want to understand, learn, or take away from this passage? What might make this difficult? What might make this hard for me to understand? And there's lots of things to consider here. There's things to consider when you're determining your purpose, if you're reading for pleasure or if you're reading with a specific goal in mind. There's a difference when you're reading to put together your IKEA coffee table or when you're reading, for just information about plot or characters in your latest romance novel or your latest crime mystery novel. There's a different purpose in all of our reading, but all reading gives you some sort of understanding, gives you some sort of meaning. And when you know that purpose and you determine that purpose from the beginning, it helps to target your reading. Also, what might make this difficult? A lot of times it is those unknown words that you come across that make it difficult, or unknown concepts. So we're going to talk today about some strategies and some ways to attack those difficulties in determining your purpose. Next, approach the text. How are you going to go into that reading? Well, you're going to ask yourself, what do I already know? If you come across a test passage that says Industrial Revolution, you know that the title of the passage is going to be about the Industrial Revolution. You may know diddly squat about the Industrial Revolution, but there might be some things even within the title of that passage, industrial, industry. Well, that triggers thoughts about factories and workers. So that even gives you an inkling. Anytime you can have any kind of context or understanding about what the text is going to be about, your brain's going to be on high alert. So ask yourself, what do I already know? What details stand out? Some of these passages are going to have keywords. They're going to be separated into sections. Those are things you need to pay attention to. And within those subsections, are there tables? Are there graphs? Are there charts? That information, especially in the science and social studies sections, and especially in those nonfiction passages, which we know from looking at the content of all those tests are going to be a big chunk. Those are especially important to pay attention to those. Don't just skip over those in your reading. Really pay attention to those subsections, tables, graphs, and charts. All right, while you're reading, the mistake that many people make is they think that reading is a passive activity. Well, I'm just reading these words, they're circling around in my brain, and then hopefully something good's going to come out on the other side. The fact is that reading should be, if you're reading with that purpose, should be meaningful because it should be active. Do you understand what you're reading? Are you just reading and then you wait till you get all the way to the end because your purpose is just to read from the first word to the last word? No, your purpose is to understand what you're reading. So if you read a paragraph and don't understand it, there is no shame in the game of backing up, rereading that, because you're going to save yourself time in the long run because you're going to understand more as you go along. Asking yourself, okay, I'm starting to read this, but I'm not really understanding. Maybe I need to go back and reread now before it's too late. Are you getting the information you need? You've already established that purpose in the beginning. A lot of times, your directions are going to show you that purpose. They're going to tell you what you're looking for. Are you looking for main idea? Are you looking for contrasting or comparable ideas in essays that are based on opinion? Are you getting the information that you need? Ask yourself these questions in the back of your head while you're reading. And are you skipping important info? Do you see those charts and you think, I'll come back to it later? Those charts are placed in the passages for a reason. They aren't used like an appendix at the end where you go and read them all at the end. If they're in the middle of a passage, they're in the middle of the passage for a reason. So make sure you're not skipping over important information. And are you taking notes? And I can already feel some of you rolling your eyes thinking, I only use scratch paper for math. Well, you got to turn that on its head. In fact, if you need to go get some scratch paper now, we are going to go through some note-taking tips and tools today. Even for our doodlers out there, we're going to talk about some graphic organizers and the way that you can organize your notes. Taking notes is a great way to stay alert and active while you're reading. And then, of course, when you get to the end, the E in the D.A.R.E process is evaluate. Review your notes. Go over the things that you may have learned throughout the text. Ask yourself what you thought about while you were reading. Think about what you read and go back to that original purpose. Did you succeed in finding out the main idea? Did you succeed in getting opposite points of view? Did you succeed in finding some key details in the story? Always go back to your purpose. Now, these D.A.R.E concepts are a part of a large, I want you to think about it like an umbrella. These are big concepts. And now we're going to break down some of those big concepts, the things that go under that umbrella. We'll review D.A.R.E at the end and how everything fits together. But I'm going to show you some very specific strategies within finding the purpose, within approaching the text, within reading, and within evaluating that will be super practical and really handy for you to pull out of your proverbial back pocket. And the first one is questioning. Are you questioning when you're reading? There's a great strategy called the 3 whats of reading that I want you to consider. The three whats of reading ask you to ask yourself three questions. One's at the beginning of the reading, one's in the middle of the reading, and one's at the end of the reading. The first one is before. Again, you're asking yourself, what do I want to know? This picks at that purpose. It starts to help you to dig deeper. What do I want to know in this reading? The second question you ask, what does this mean? Again, checking for meaning, checking for those unknown words, checking for things to make sure you're understanding as you're reading. And then the third question is after. What have I learned? If somebody asked me to sum up what I just read in this paragraph, what would I have learned? Those are the three whats of reading, and they can frame your action, that activity before, during, and after you read a passage. Here's a big tip, and it goes back to those directions. If the directions note specific questions while reading, be on the lookout and make a note of them. Some of these directions, again, if I can get you to have one takeaway today, reading the directions is the most important thing you will read throughout this entire exam. Those directions are meant to guide you. Make sure you're reading and understanding the directions well before you even jump into the passage. That's the best advice I can give you right here from the onset. Because those directions may give you specific purposes. They may tell you, read the following passage, and at the end, you're going to answer questions about details and vocabulary. So you're going to look for keywords. You're going to look for the details the author gives. Those directions might say, read the following passage and give us the central idea. So you know you're going to look for how everything fits together and that central idea. The directions will drive your purpose, and they will help you to ask yourself those questions and keep you on high alert while you're reading. The directions are super duper important. If you're struggling to answer those questions while you're reading, try scanning for relevant sections to reread. If you do start to get in the middle or even at the end when you're reviewing and you're starting to struggle with, I still don't understand this, I really don't understand, then go back and scan maybe sections that you did carelessly skip, maybe those charts or something that you did jump over. Go back and reread those to make sure you can fill in the blanks. Walking away from that passage with a full understanding will arm you with all the skills you need before you jump into those questions. Alrighty, speaking of questions, before we move into our next strategy, who has them? Anybody have any questions? Please type those into your chat window or your Q&A. We will get in there. We will stop just like this every now and then to see if everybody is tracking. Again, I'm talking really quickly because we have a lot of information to cover today. So if you say, Jen, I'm not following you, I'm happy to stop and go back. But let's move in, since no one seems to have any questions, let's move into this tool of skimming and scanning. A lot of people think these are kind of, give up. Well, I'm just going to give up and skim it or scan it. No, these are actually really good tools that you can use in addition to fully reading the passage. And another error that people make is they think that skimming and scanning is the same thing. They're similar in process, but they're different in purpose. And let me show you what I mean. Skimming gives you an overview of the text. It can help you from start to finish to figure out how you're going to prepare to read by getting a preview. Maybe you skim over the text and you notice, okay, I see some charts in there. I'm going to have to pay attention to those. I see some sections in bold. I'm going to need to pay attention to those. I also see some words in italics where the words are kind of shifted over to the side, or I see some words in bold. Definitely going to need to pay attention to those. It helps you to be on high alert, preparing to read by getting a preview. Get the big ideas quickly. Again, you might see some key words that are repeated. That means something's going to come up over and over and over again. You know that's going to be a big idea. As you skim over it with your eyes, you might need to go back at the end and review what you read. So skimming at the beginning and skimming at the end is a good habit to get into. Here's a tip. When skimming for important ideas, again, look for words that repeat or answer these 5 questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. If you see something that especially is in a nonfiction text, like let's say it's going over instructions for how to put something together. It's an informational text in science, or it's going through the scientific method. They're going to be very factual in the passage. You're going to see who is performing the experiment, what they're trying to test. You may even see when or where they're performing the experiment, and you're definitely going to see why and how they do it. If they're taking the time to detail the answers to these questions, then 9 times out of 10, you're going to need those details when you answer questions about the passage at the end. So when skimming for important ideas, look for those 5 W's and an H: who, what, when, where, why, and how. It will really arm you with some good skimming advice. All right, so we talked about skimming. Well, what's the difference in scanning? I'm still going over it with my eyes, but again, I told you the purpose is different. Here is a way to find specific information within a lot of text. So let's say, again, let's stick with that analogy of that science experiment. You're reading, and now you need to go back and find out, what were the facts that I just read? What was the name of that scientist? Where did they perform that experiment? I might look for names. I might look for dates. Definitely along that scientific element, if they are giving the results of that experiment, they might share some statistics, and you'll see percentages, and there might be questions about that at the end of the passage. Scanning is a great way to go back and find keywords. Again, back at those bolds that you saw when you skimmed it in the beginning. Scanning is more of a review type process when you go back to look for specific facts, names, dates, statistics, and keywords. And here's a tip. Before you read, look for how the text is laid out, because it may give you clues to make it easier to find the information when you go back and scan for it at the end. Skimming and scanning, no matter how you slice it, it helps you to find out where information lives within the body of passage. All right, any questions about those 2 very important tools before we move on to note taking? And again, I can hear that grunt back there. I know I have you all on mute, but nobody likes to talk about note taking. I think a lot of people don't like to talk about note taking because of 2 different things. I think one, maybe you were never really taught to do it. Your teacher just gave you a book and said, hey, take notes on this chapter, and nobody really showed you any way to do it. Or the opposite could be true. Somebody showed you a super complicated way to take notes, and it became super overwhelming, and the note-taking process was almost not worth it because you got more confused by that than you did just trying to read it and understand it. I hear you. I've fallen into both of those camps. So today we're going to talk about writing and organizing information in a text for review to really, really help you with memory and understanding, because we're going to do it in a really simplified way. It's a PNR. Again, we're going to have an acronym there: P for preview, N for note, and R for review. Let me show you what that looks like. So if you have got your notes out, you've got some scrap paper with us today, go ahead and divide out that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. Doesn't matter where you turn it. Looks like I've maybe done this landscape, but that's just the way it fit best on this screen. Go ahead and make 3 columns. Label the columns in this order: preview, note, and review. We're going to pretend that we are reading a passage, and the first thing that we are going to do, because we're going to note that we first need to look for purpose, is we're going to preview the text. We're going to skim it and scan over it, look for things. Maybe we already see some questions. Maybe we already see some things that are standing out to us. The preview section is a great place to write those questions or write down things that are standing out to us from the very beginning, because this is going to drive this purpose of what do I need to know. The next thing we're going to do here in the note section is we're going to start to write some of those answers. If we see some things that stand out, and then we see some of those things that are standing out kind of coming full circle, and we see those answers coming into place, go ahead and take a note there. Draw a little star, draw a little circle next to those answers that you see. These are important points. If there's keywords or things in bold that you want to take note of, the note section is a great place to add those. But here's something that's really, really good to add to your notes section. And we've already talked about it today. And that's who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those 5 W's and an H. I always like that. 5 W's and an H. If you see that the information is going to have a lot of content, go ahead and write this out. I'm going to go into this with purpose, knowing that I'm going to look for who, what, when, where, and why, so that when you go back and review, you can look at how your notes are organized, restate that information, and recall what you recorded on this column. Who did you note in the passage? What did you note in the passage? When did the passage take place? Where is the setting? Why is this taking place? And how did something function? Going back and reviewing the answers to these questions will really, really drive your understanding of the text and help you to better answer test questions about process and about the information. This is a super easy way to organize your notes and attack these passages. And I use that word for a very specific reason. Look, I know that people aren't taking notes when you're reading for pleasure. I don't sit down with my Home and Garden magazine and take notes unless I'm writing down a paint color. And usually then I'm telling Siri to take a note so I can go and buy it at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that. We know that this note taking is for the purpose of reading these passages and attacking these answers. And we just want to prepare you with the things that will help you to do that. This might not help everybody, but it could be the answer that you're looking for. Quick, easy way to preview, make note of information, and review that information when you're reading a text. All right, I said we had something for our doodlers or our artists out there. If note taking is not your jam, graphic organizers might be. And we're going to show you a really specific graphic organizer today. But graphic organizers in general are pictures. They're a visual connection of ideas. You know, in elementary school, you might have had your teacher go up to the board and say, okay, today, boys and girls, we're going to read a passage about dogs. And she writes the word dog on the board and she circles it. And then out from that circle, she draws a line and says, dogs have 4 legs. And she writes 4 legs and circles that, draws a line from that middle circle out to that 4-leg circle. And that's a detail about dogs. Then she adds, dogs like bones, dogs need exercise, dogs wear collars, all of these different ideas about the central idea of dogs. And it looks like all of these circles that are drawn together to this middle circle. That's a graphic organizer. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, have you ever made a pro and con list? Have you ever written out events of a story or created a timeline to remember what order something happened in? If you have, then you've already used this strategy. You just don't know it. So it's a fancy way to say, I'm going to visually connect these ideas. The one we're going to look at today sounds fancy and complicated, but it's really not. It's a Venn diagram. And for those that are somewhat familiar with graphic organizers, as my middle school son would say, Mama, is that the one with the circles? Yes, son, it's the one with the circles. So we're going to draw these circles that come together. A Venn diagram is used when you're looking to make a connection between ideas. When you would want to use a Venn diagram depends on your purpose. But let's say you're looking at directions on a test that are going to say something like this. You're going to read 2 essays. One essay will share an opinion that's a pro, and the other essay will share an opinion that's a con. You're going to compare and contrast these ideas. As you read, you're going to want to put all of the one column of opinions in one circle and all of the opposing column of opinions in the other circle, and try to find things that are similar between the two to put in the middle where those circles overlap. So everything on this side should be one different opinion. Everything on this side should be another different opinion. And where those ideas meet, where the 2 authors of the 2 different opinions can agree, you're going to have information that's the same. The tip here is that this type of organizer can be super helpful, again, when you're asked to compare and contrast. This will be in some way, shape, or form. It almost always is in a reading section of the high school equivalency exam, because the testers, contrary to what you think, they're not trying to trick you. They just want to make sure, can you read, understand what you read, and form an opinion? And one of the best ways to test that is looking at comparing and contrasting two different ideas or two different thoughts. So let me give you an example of this in action. Let's say you saw a passage, and the passage written by the first author says, I love the city. And in that passage, they talk about great restaurants, they talk about museums, they talk about diversity and sporting events that are available in the city. They talk about theaters, and they just love the noise of the city. And then the second author talks about the country. We have great fresh produce. We have historical places. It's quiet out here, and I love the quiet. We also have sports events that we like to do out here in the country, maybe different ones than you have in the city. And then we also have these wonderful festivals. Obviously, this author had a lot of great points about the city that we can see in this one opinion. This author had a lot of great points about the country that we can see in this other opinion. But they agreed on one thing. Both the city and the country both have great sporting events. So here you're comparing and contrasting ideas by using this Venn diagram, and this helps you to better organize your information. This is especially helpful with the writing section. We will do a follow-up writing session here together specific to what you need to know about the writing on your high school equivalency exam, but I often relay to students that creating a Venn diagram is a great way for you to kind of flush out your ideas if you're asked to write an opinion essay about something. But we can talk about that later. So Venn diagram, just one of the many, many, many graphic organizers that you can use. Alrighty, anybody have any questions about that before we jump into another common trouble spot? You know, I have students tell me all the time, you know, that's great, Jen. You tell me to come up with a purpose. You tell me to come up with a plan. I just don't feel like I'm a great reader because there's just words that I come up with that I just don't know. I just don't have, you know, a very large vocabulary. There's a lot of things that I just don't encounter in everyday life. And so those words trip me up. Well, those unfamiliar words, just like anything, we can attack with a plan. And the plan that I'm going to show you today is by finding context clues. That in and of itself may throw you off. Well, what in the world are context clues? Context clues are basically all the other stuff that surrounds the words that you don't know. It's all of the other words in a sentence or paragraph that can help give you meaning to an unknown word. And there's lots of different ways that we can look for context clues in the readings on these exams. One of them is by looking for examples, signal words that include such as, for example, including. Whenever you see such as, for example, or including in a passage, you're about to get some really big clues. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you came across this sentence. Prisoners face tribulations such as depression, poor nutrition, and group violence. Well, you might stop dead in your tracks and say, prisoners face tribulations. What are tribulations? I've never seen that word. I don't know what that means. But ding, 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 right after the word that you may not know, I see such as. Oh, so I'm going to remember that Jen told me when I see such as, I'm about to get an example. So an example of a tribulation would be depression. An example of tribulation is depression and poor nutrition. Yet another example of a tribulation is depression, poor nutrition, and group violence. Well, none of those sound good. They all sound pretty bad. So maybe tribulations are bad things or bad circumstances. I can check it by going back and saying, prisoners face bad circumstances, such as depression, poor nutrition, and group violence. Yep, that makes sense. So I'm going to be confident and know that with very, very little doubt that tribulation must mean a bad thing or an obstacle. Here we used an example with those key words, such as, for example, or including. In this case, it was such as, to help us troubleshoot this, to figure out based on all the other stuff in the sentence, what this unknown word might mean. Let's look at another example. Sometimes synonyms or words that are similar will help you figure out an unknown word. Looking for a similar word in meaning will help you troubleshoot that unknown word. Let's look at an example here. Our plans finally came to fruition when we reached our goal. What's the funky word in that sentence? I would say it's fruition. It's got fruit in it. Does it have anything to do with fruit? Well, I don't see anything else in the sentence about fruit, so maybe that's not right. Our plans finally came to fruition when we reached our goal. When did the plans come to fruition? When we reached our goal. So maybe fruition has something to do with reaching a goal, with hitting a target. So let's go back and fill it in. Our plans finally came together, finally hit the mark when we reached our goal. Maybe fruition actually does mean when something comes full circle, when it comes into being. And if that's where your train of thought went, then you'd be absolutely right. Looking for meaning for the unknown word within the sentence, finding something similar will always help you with you look at things in context or in the words themselves. Look at another one, antonyms. Antonyms give us a clue not to something similar about the unknown word, but something opposite of the unknown word. If we know the opposite, then we can help to figure out what the known is. So how do we do that? Well, in this case, just like we had signal words in our examples, we have signal words for antonyms. However, but, than, yet, in contrast to, on the other hand. I liked her, but there was something shady about her. I think she's nice, yet I just don't trust her. You always know that something is about to come in opposite of a phrase or a sentence when you hear any of those words. The same is true when you come across an unknown word. Let's look at an example. The speech was quite verbose, but the email recap was brief. Verbose, that's a funny word. I see verb in there, so maybe it has something to do with words themselves. I don't know. The speech, well, a speech is made up of words, so maybe I'm on the right track. The speech was quite verbose, but the email recap was brief. But, okay, well, if the speech was quite verbose, but the email recap was brief, maybe brief is an anonym or an opposite of this word that I don't know. And if that's where your thinking led you, then you would be right. What's the opposite of brief? Long or lengthy. Let's fill it in the blank and see if we're right. The speech was quite long, but the email recap was brief. Ding, ding, ding. We've just gone back and double checked that we understand what this word means. Antonyms can give us a clue to the opposite of the unknown word. Knowing the opposite can help us find that original funky meaning. All right, and we've already been using this tip as we've gone over these suggestions today, whether you noticed it or not. We've been checking with substitutes. Once we think we might be on the right track about an unknown word, go back and fill it in with a possible similar word or similar definition to see if the sentence still makes sense when you fill it in the blank with what you think that word might be. And that will help you check for understanding and meaning. All right, I'm going to check for questions. Checking for understanding and meaning with all of you right now. Let me know if something I said today was confusing, if I went too quickly, if there's still something you would like to dig into. We're going to use a lot more examples here in the next little bit, but I want to check in with you now while we're at this point. All right. Oh, thanks, Jacob. I think you're great. I don't even know you, but if you're taking time out of your busy day to join us here for this coaching session, then I think you're pretty swell. I have loved these because they've been more and more fun as we've gone along. I love getting to know our students, and I love getting to know your story, so thanks. All righty. Inferences. Probably I have students call not only about unknown words, but if I had the top two things, inferences would be one. It battles out what do I do about the unknown words for a top frustration with our students. Inferences. What is an inference? To me, to some of you, some of that might be an unknown word. I don't even know what an inference is, so how am I going to make one? Well, it's a common trouble spot, but it's not as hard as you think. Let me put it in a real life context for you, a real life meaning for you. Have you ever bought a thoughtful gift for a friend? You saw something at the store, it automatically reminded you of somebody for, an inside joke that you have, or, you know what their favorite color is, and you see something in that color and it just stands out for you. If you bought a thoughtful gift for a friend, maybe your mom said, hey, let's meet for lunch. Just pick a spot you think I'd like. And you pick Mexican food because you know that she loves chips and salsa. Or have you made a first impression about that weirdo neighbor that lives down the street? There must be a reason why you think he's a weirdo neighbor. Maybe, I don't know, he talks to himself, or he comes out in his bathrobe and he drinks something brown in a glass early in the morning. I'm being very specific because I have a neighbor very much like that. But you've made that first impression. You've bought that thoughtful gift. You've picked out a spot your mom might like based on something you already knew. You made an inference. You made a guess or an inference based on what you knew, and then clues from something you saw out and about, from options that were available, or observations that you made. In this case, you're going to be reading for inference, so your clues are going to come from the text, or going to come from the words themselves. All right, so here's an example. I believe this one came from GED. It may have come from HiSET, but this is a practice exam passage, and it's pretty straightforward. This is in that smaller category of literary text, but this is a passage about Susan. I'm going to read it for us today. You can follow along, and then we're going to use a method looking at details, clues, what you already know, and inferences that are possible. And you can go ahead and write these down on your notes if you want to do that about this section, so that you can see these inferences aren't so difficult. Break it down on the baseline level, and then you can apply it to harder text down the road. But I'm going to read for us today. Susan left in the middle of the film and exited into a dark, empty street. As she looked for a taxi, she noticed a gray-coated man at the bus stop. Holding her breath, Susan backed up under the cover of the marquee. Had he seen her? She was lucky. He was looking away. Now he turned his face to the theater doorway, and her heart raced as she hid in the shadows. Susan had nowhere to go but back inside the theater. As soon as he glanced away, she ducked through the glass doors, past the attendant, and into the dark, anonymous theater seats. What now? Well, this passage definitely sets a tone. It sets a tone from the very beginning. It's a dark tone. We see gray-coated man. We see Susan holding her breath. She feels lucky that he hadn't seen her. I'm already getting a feeling here. If you want to share your inference that you're getting, you can go ahead and jump into chat or Q&A to do that. I'm getting a feeling here. There's something that I can guess about this passage. And we got some people that are jumping in here on Q&A. She's scared. That's exactly right. That is a great inference that you can make from this passage. Susan feels afraid. You've got lots of details in there. What are some of them? The biggest one is she hid when she saw the man. It's already kind of set the tone again, dark and empty street. He's wearing a weirdo gray coat, maybe like my weird neighbor down the street, but he's wearing a gray coat. He's at the bus stop. I get the feeling that she's by herself. She's holding her breath. Well, what do we already know that make us able to confirm this inference that she's afraid? We know that people hide when they're afraid. They jump under the covers if they're watching a scary movie. In this case, she jumped under the marquee. That might be an unknown word, but it's basically an awning outside the theater. She jumped under the cover of the marquee. So we're able to make a really, really great inference from this passage based on details within the story. We see that she's hiding. We see the setting of the story is really dark and dreary, and what we already know, that people hide when they're afraid. So making this inference can be confirmed by going back and looking at details and discovering what we already know. And here's the thing, guys, some of the questions on the test might ask you this. They might go ahead and tell you the inference. They might pose a question like this. The inference is that Susan feels afraid. How do we know that? Well, if one of your answer choices is Susan hid when she saw the man, then absolutely, that would make sense. Inferences are nothing more than using clues in a passage to find out what makes the most sense. It would not make sense for you to buy your mother ballet slippers if she never took a dance class in her life. It would not make sense to invite the weird neighbor to dinner because you've already kind of made a judgment. Maybe he is actually a nice guy. I don't know. We'll find it out. I'm telling you way too much about this guy today. As an example, some things don't make sense, but other things, based on the clues, what we already know, the setting that's been placed within the reading itself, will help us make these inferences. Again, inferences are none other than what is an idea that makes sense. In this passage, the inference is that we don't know what's going to happen next. We just know that Susan feels afraid. Inferences. Alrighty. The other big thing that you might get asked about in your high school equivalency exam reading section is this concept of central ideas, the main idea, the topic sentence. Those are things that you hear that are similar to this concept of central ideas. A central idea is the topic and then the author's idea. These are often things that you'll be asked. You might be asked to find that topic or that central idea and then express what you think the author's opinion is on that topic based on details or statements that were made in the body of the passage. And we're going to look at a really specific, kind of funny one here in a second. It's called Stop Whining About Garbage Pickup. I love this one because it just sounds like something that somebody might have written into, I don't know, like an editorial section of a newspaper or called to complain about something. It just seems like that old kind of get off my lawn kind of guy. And you'll see as we read, but stop whining about garbage pickup. That's a pretty bold statement there at the onset. And the first question we can ask ourselves is, what is this topic? Well, it tells me right here in the title. I might know that it might be something about whining, but look, it's telling us, what is this topic about? It's about garbage pickup. So if you're asked to look at this, yes, it's going to help to confirm, to skim and scan and see that a lot of these statements are about garbage pickup. But in this case, if you're asked what the topic is, it's right here in the title. Stop whining about. About what? About garbage pickup. So look for those very, very blatant things. Again, contrary to what people believe, these test makers are not trying to trick you. They are giving you everything you need within the context of this exam. They just want to know that you can read and understand what you read and then make some sensible judgments about it. All right, so listen to what this guy says. I am sick of people whining about every other week garbage pickup. People keep complaining about how impossible it is to live without weekly pickup. They endlessly grumble about piles of trash and the smell it makes. Some people say that the less frequent service is unfair for larger families or those with infants and toddlers. I happen to have my own family and a little one in diapers, and I do just fine with every other week pickup. If families would reduce what they buy, reuse and repair items, and compost organic waste, it wouldn't be an issue. Households can make changes to reduce the amount of waste they produce. It's time to start encouraging change for the better. It's useless to insist that current habits are reasonable, sustainable, or responsible. What are some things we can say about how this gentleman feels about garbage pickup? One of the things we can do to figure out what the author's point of view or the author's opinion is we can look at some important ideas that he states within the topic. I think one of the biggest things, and it's actually really smart on his part, is he does recognize that some people say one of their arguments in their favor is that it's unfair for larger families or those with infants and toddlers. He rebukes that or comes against that, pushes up against that by saying, I got a family, I got a little one, and we do just fine. So he's acknowledging that there's going to be some pushback about his opinion, but this is where he stands. Then the rest of the passage goes on to why he's just fine, what he thinks that people could do to make bi-weekly garbage pickup work. They need to reduce, they need to recycle, they need to come up with other habits. So we see the topic is about garbage pickup. We see some important ideas about the topic. And so in general, the central idea of the passage is, yes, it's about garbage pickup, but it's about the fact that this man thinks that the current process for garbage pickup is just fine. People just need to change their habits instead of changing the pickup times or frequency. So we're able to see the topic, we're able to see some ideas or points of interest that the author makes, and we're definitely, because he's pretty opinionated, able to see the central idea of his passage. All right, some tips when it comes to the central idea. Again, that title. That title may help you from the onset. Doesn't mean you can fly through without double checking, without checking your inferences, without checking by skimming and scanning, but the title really may point to the topic. It may give you some really, really big clues right there at the beginning. Look for repeated words. What were the repeated words in there? Recycling, reusing, repurposing, new habits. Those are some of the things, those were his big suggestions for making that weekly garbage pickup work. We saw those ideas repeated. And we're linking those ideas. What is he doing with all those ideas? He's justifying why he thinks that people should stop whining about garbage pickup. He's justifying his opinion with all of those ideas. So their commonality is that they're working together to try to prove his point, to make his opinion a solid one. Graphic organizer may help here. Let's pretend that, so let's name this guy Joe. So Joe has this opinion that people should stop whining about garbage pickup, but Sally, his neighbor down the street, has 5 kids in diapers and she can't keep up with the organic composting and everything that he wants to do. So she writes a totally different opinion. And we're asked to find the things that those people have in common or compare and contrast. Again, that Venn diagram might help there. It might help to have kind of a story plot where you write out and circle those the central idea and then all of the supporting details, lots of different ways. And my point is, whatever way works best for you that helps you to organize that information, whether it be notes, graphic organizers, writing out questions and answering them, do it. It doesn't matter. It's not a race. The only thing you have to do is complete that test within a certain period of time. You don't have to do it like the person sitting next to you. You find the way that works best for you, take it and run with it. Tell me again. I told you we were going to stop right where we started, and we started with this overall umbrella D.A.R.E concept. Again, what is D.A.R.E? Determine the purpose. Figure out why they want you to read that passage. The directions are a great place to start. Approach the text with confidence. Know that if you see unknown words, you got some tools in your toolbox and you know what to do. Know if you see some of those signal words, such as, for example, however, but, those things are telling you things within those passages and you know what to do with that. Approach the text with confidence. Read. Read in an active fashion. Don't just let the words cycle around in your brain and then go out the other side. Ask questions along the way. Check for meaning along the way. Don't skip over those charts. Read with action. And last, evaluate. Did I understand what I just read? Do I need to go back and scan and look for key terms? You may not know that until you get to the questions themselves. You're reading the question to follow up the passage and think, oh gosh, I know I read that. I'm going to go back and evaluate. I'm going to go back and reread the paragraph that spoke to this answer, and you can confirm that answer right off the bat. The other thing I want to tell you is we want you to talk to us. The student success team is here. That's my personal company email there, jen@essentialed.com. If there's anything you want me to follow up on today, please let me know. If you are somebody that at the very beginning of this session could not answer the question, which test am I taking, and you weren't sure about that, great place is to look on our website at where to test. Those tests, HiSET, GED, and TASK, are open and offered nationwide, but not all states offer the same tests. Some offer all 3, some offer 2, some offer just 1. Don't get confused about what test you're going to take because you need to know that from the onset. So if you're confused about that, let me know. If you want to dive into some of this more, then we can do that a little bit as well. Also wanted to let you know we have a great testing coaching session coming up in a couple of weeks and a study session coming up in a couple of weeks. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for, again, taking time out of your day to join us here. We're so glad that you did. We hope to see you again soon. See ya. Bye.